Hi, podcast listeners. Welcome to the A World of Difference podcast. We have so many guests on this show making a difference in our lives, making a difference all around the world with the expertise that they bring. And yet so many of you are reaching out to me saying, you want more. It's not enough just what we're putting on these podcast episodes for you. And so I am here to extend a very warm welcome to you to our Difference Maker community, where you can join for as little as $5 a month to get all this extra content. Out the gate, you're going to get 30 plus mini-sodes of exclusive content not available for the regular podcast listeners, and an exclusive mini-sode every month. And you'll get exclusive voting power to help us pick podcast topics and more. And that's at our Changers tier. There's 3 different main tiers and then an extra larger tier. But whatever tier that you join at, you will be included in this extra content. And I know that many of you are wanting to go a little bit deeper. And so even though it gets a little wild in there sometimes because of how deep we go, I want you to join us there. This extra content is very special. It means a great deal to me to be a part of this community with you. And I would love to just exchange ideas or perspectives that you have around these different episodes. And that's the place where we do it. So please show up to our Difference Maker community. Give us $5 out of your pocket every month. And I think that you'll have a lot of fun in there because we do. And I would love for you to join us. So go to patreon.com/A World of Difference to join us there. Welcome to the A World of Difference podcast. I'm your hostess, Lori Adams Brown, and you're listening to episode 35. If you're thinking of starting a podcast, I recommend Anchor. And I also recommend starting a podcast because it's tons of fun. Anchor has been a great place for me getting started because it's free. They have creation tools that basically let you record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. They distribute it basically everywhere for you. And you've basically got all you need to make a podcast just right in one place. So go to the Anchor app or anchor.fm to get started. Today we get to hear from April Diaz, who started Ezra & Company. She lives here in Southern California, actually not Northern California, but close enough. And Ezra & Company is committed to activating women toward wholeness in life and leadership and in full partnership with men. Actually, April pastored in the local church for nearly 20 years at 2 of the most influential churches in the country, which I'm sure you would have heard of. And the last 5 years, she's coached hundreds of leaders and spoken all around the United States. She loves to come alongside leaders and influencing them in the margins of culture. She speaks and writes frequently on living and leading with wholeness. She loves to talk about leadership, soul care, youth ministry with teenagers, and caring for your body. Some of the stuff she has to say about that is just really helpful. She is a tomboy, but loves her sparkly shoes. She, for the last 5 years, she's coached hundreds of leaders and spoken all around the U.S. She loves to come alongside leaders and influencing them along the margins of culture. Her first book, Redefining the Role of the Youth Worker, a manifesto for integration, just teaches the church how to work with teenagers. She loves teenagers. And she's also been partnering with Stuff You Can Use and Fuller Youth Institute. So she lives with her high school sweetheart, Brian, that she's married to, and they have 3 kids and live in Orange County, California. So welcome to today's show, April Diaz. Hi, April. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Lori. It's so good to meet you in real life, Zooming style at least. So thank you for having me.
Yeah, of course. I love the work that you're doing and some of how your journey has led you to where you are. But and some of my listeners might already know who you are. But for those who don't, I'd love for you just to tell us about yourself and your background, your family, and what you're currently doing.
Yes. So my name is April Diaz, and I grew up predominantly in the Midwest, Central Illinois, Indiana, spent a couple years in Texas as a kiddo. So grew up in a very, very conservative, fundamentalist, evangelical family. the further I get away from my childhood, the more I realize how incredibly conservative and fundamentalist it was. But it's obviously all that I just knew. Very white, very middle class. And my dad was a pastor when I was in like middle school and high school, which was pretty formative for me in a lot of ways because he had left a thriving business to go into ministry, quote unquote, and become a pastor. And it was very disorienting and disrupting for my extended family for him to go into that space from, the Christian church space that we had been in. And so, yeah, I graduated high school in Indiana and met my husband there. Actually, we're high school sweethearts. We met when we were 17 years old, and we're about to celebrate 20 years of marriage, which feels bonkers.
Congrats.
Thanks. Yeah, he's still my favorite person. He is the best man I've ever known. And I've loved him since almost the moment that I saw him. It was a very unique connection that the two of us had. And so we met in high school and started life together in Chicago. As a couple, we both worked at a large church that a lot of folks know of in the Chicagoland area. Then we moved out to Southern California it's been 17 years ago. So we've lived out here and kind of started our family out here. I was a pastor at a large church out in Orange County, California, where we still live. And it was kind of a weird deal because I was the first Caucasian pastor that they hired. I was the youngest pastor on the team, and I was only the second woman pastor that had ever been brought on to the team. So there was kind of this trifecta of like, I was really the outsider coming in, but my husband's Puerto Rican, and I had some kind of diverse experience in my early 20s. And so it really opened up for us, like what we really wanted to build our family off of and how we saw church and leadership and spiritual formation and leadership development, all of those things. And so I was on that team for almost a decade, 5 different roles in 10 years. And it was really, I think, where I cut my teeth in leadership and as a woman in leadership, for sure. We've got 3 kids now. Our oldest 2 we adopted from Ethiopia. It's been 10 years. We just celebrated our 10th anniversary of Judah and Adase coming home. And then we pretty miraculously got pregnant with our youngest kiddo 9 months after Judah and Adase came home. So, and then he came 7 weeks early. So we went from 0 to 3 kids in 15 months.
Wow.
And it's been wild ever since. So, I mean, now they're all turning their new ages in the next couple of months, but they're like 9, 11, and 13 coming up. So it feels very normal. It's like what people plan to do, like what is kind of a traditional deal, but our family is anything but traditional in that regard. And it's very much an only God kind of story. So it's a little bit about my background. I was pastoring in the church for 17 years between those 2 different churches. In the last 5 or 6 years, I have been kind of on my own, trying to figure out what does it look like for me to lead and use my gifts and be the best steward of all that I have been given in my life and in my leadership. But 2 years ago, almost exactly, I started a company called Azer & Co. And we're a coaching company that's all about activating women to live and lead with wholeness. So that's been a wild journey in and of itself. It's a whole different podcast episode altogether of entrepreneurship and being a CEO and running a company, especially in a pandemic year. It's been wild. But yeah, that's a little bit about me.
Yeah, I can only imagine what that that last part you mentioned has been like this year, because there were several people that started something business-wise, entrepreneurial-wise, right before COVID, and then had to face what that playbook looked like without a playbook.
Yeah,
I can imagine the challenges that you've faced on many levels.
Yeah.
But I kind of want to back up a little bit in terms of that and really just ask why. Why did you set out to start Azer & Company?
I'm sure you resonate with this in some part within your story. I feel like it chose me. I feel like I started Azer & Co. because I had to, because I not as a should, but as a, if I don't, I will be missing out on a huge part of my story and the story of millions of women all over the world. And what I mean by that is I've never really felt like I have fit the mold of what a woman is supposed to be. And certainly an American woman is one thing, a Christian American woman is another thing. But I just have always felt a little bit outside of what the prescription or what the box was for women. So I never really felt like I fit into like brownies or Girl Scouts growing up, or the cheerleader, or, the popular girl, or, going to college in order to get an MRS degree or become a pastor's wife, or there was just a lot that I felt like outside. I've never wanted to be a part of mom's ministries or women's ministries. All that just felt really weird and outside for me. Um, and yet I looked around at so many women that were in my world, and regardless of how their personalities were or what their gifts were like, that they also felt like they didn't fit in the mold. And a couple years ago, 3 years ago, I got fired from a job that really mattered to me. It wasn't my end all be all. It wasn't something that felt like it was the rest of my life kind of thing, but it was an important work for me. And it was a very painful process. And in the midst of a year, really, of healing, processing, dreaming again, finding myself, forgiving what had been done to me, I really kind of was able to connect the dots in a way for the first time in my life around who it is that God had made me to be, and all of these little elements from my story that were building up into this one moment of God saying, it is time for you to be a voice, to be an advocate, to create a platform for women to live and lead with wholeness. It's been my whole journey, both personally and in the work that I've done for 20 years. So I actually have the word Azer tattooed on my arm alongside of the Hebrew word.
Nice.
And that tattoo's been there for years because I learned that Old Testament Hebrew word has been used really to sideline women. The word is often translated in Genesis as helper or helpmate. And most of the times, actually 16 out of the 21 times that the word Azer is used in the Old Testament, it's a word that's used to describe God. And it's a word that's used to describe God helping us, being a warrior, a rescuer, a face-to-face deliverer. And so it's certainly not a word or a descriptor that is meant to be secondary or subservient or in a support role or less than, because that's not who God is. God does not play those kind of second fiddle roles with us. And so it's really been a reclaiming of my own story and of my own leadership, but it's also been much more of a communal and corporate cry for me of, gosh, wouldn't it be incredible if there were more women that were not just empowered to live and lead with wholeness, but knew intrinsically who they were, and that there was nothing that could hold them back, that there was everything that was possible to them because of who they've been created to be, not in spite of, but because of who they've been created to be. So it's emerged from pain, it's emerged from calling, it's emerged from my own story, and it's emerged from this ancient story that's been told really since the beginning of time when woman was created.
Yes, I love how you worded all that. And I think I just want to take a moment to acknowledge that there could be women listening to this, that this is the first time they're hearing this word and the actual original meaning. English speaking women who have read versions of the Bible where this Ezer word has been watered down. And instead of the powerful force that it was intended to be when God made Eve, and intended for all women to be, made in God's image, the warrior nature of a God who fights for us and rescues us and walks alongside us in all kinds of pain and suffering to rescue us out of trouble and fights battles for us. And that was the way woman was created, as an Ezer Kenegdo alongside a man. That it's not meant for men to live and work alone or be alone, but that there is this beautiful partnership that we have. And it doesn't look like a secretary, which helpmeet, helpmate, helper has often been described that way. Or it doesn't mean a man has a vision of traveling the world with an important ministry and a wife is is his travel agent booking all his flights. It's not men having visions that women implement, but
Yeah.
that women have dreams too, and women have purpose, and we have been created in God's image as warriors in God's kingdom. And so I just wanted to acknowledge that moment, that maybe some of the women listening have never heard that and
Yeah.
might have a moment of feeling like they've been lied to
Absolutely.
because of
They
how
have been.
things were
They have been.
trafficked.
That's
Yeah,
valid.
they have
Yeah.
been. Exactly.
It's the definition of being a gaslit, right? Like that's
Yeah.
exactly what has been happening for centuries because it has served men for women to play those roles, to be in those places, the travel agent, the secretary, the housewife, the caregiver to the children, the cook, all of those things. It's served them. It has not served women in the same way. And so, yes, they have been lied to. We have been lied to. And it's not God who has lied to us. It has been these other systems and these other structures. So, yeah.
Yes, absolutely. And that's the beauty in it, because at the moment you feel lied to, you may feel like a lot of things are crumbling.
Mm-hmm.
But what you're feeling crumbling isn't God at all, because God
Mm-hmm.
is now speaking into what was always
Yep.
there. And I think if we're honest with it, we recognize that we have something in us that we long to be told that. We
Mm-hmm.
long to be told that we
Yeah.
have a purpose and we matter.
Yeah.
And we matter in a significant way, not in a way that pushes others down, because
No.
that's not who God is or ever was.
No.
God is a servant, and it's in God's nature to serve, and we are
Uh-huh.
made in God's image, and God is good, and God wants good for us.
Mm-hmm.
And so at the moment you feel things are crumbling, there's God waiting to
Yeah.
say, you are supposed to be like Gal Gadot and Wonder Woman, this
Yeah.
warrior woman out there
Uh,
fighting for God's, love to spread to everyone. And so, yeah, that's what I hope people are hearing as they listen to this. Not that we're slamming anyone or that we're being critical. I know that translation of the Bible is an incredibly difficult task as somebody who speaks multiple languages and does a lot of translating. And when you're going back to something like Genesis, which is Hebrew, ancient Hebrew, I
yeah.
mean,
Yeah.
it's challenging. So I don't want to minimize that. But at the same time, it's pretty clear that some choices were made
Mm-hmm.
that were not God's choices for us. And I guess that's the main point of trying to dig
Yeah.
into this word Ezer. And I love that it's tattooed on your arm, because sometimes we have to remind ourselves and put things
Yeah.
in front of us that remind us of the truth to put in our minds,
Yes.
because there's a lot of lies out there, even within the
Yes.
church. So I know
Mm-hmm.
you coach a lot of women, and so I'd love for you to sort of just describe some of those challenges in the church that you want to coach women through and that you often face in your work.
Yeah. Oh gosh. I think that there's a handful of kind of common threads. I've literally coached 500 plus women over the last 7 or 8 years. And it is such a privilege to come alongside of a woman in oftentimes painful, vulnerable, transitory, unknown spaces, or, like when you're hitting a ceiling or you're feeling stuck or you're ready for more, like those are really vulnerable moments to step into someone's story. And then to imagine, where do you want to go from here? What is it that you want to co-create with God? What kind of future do you imagine? What is it how do you want to design a life that you love? And those can be really scary questions and moments for women who have been told implicitly or explicitly, be grateful for what you have, settle for what is in front of you, be content in the spaces that you're at, just continue, keep your head down and do the work. All of those messages are communicated to women. And so a lot of the challenges that I have experienced in women that I've coached are around knowing and owning your voice, that it matters, that it's unique, that it is given to you by the God of the universe, that it's important, that it's valuable, that you have something to say. There's challenges around feeling the full permission to dream and then to get about it. Like not just to imagine it, not just in your dreams or while you are sleeping or in the quiet of the night, but in the daytime, in the best hours of your day. What does it look like for you to set your feet and your hands to do the work that is in front of you, the dream that is within you? Because I think that those things are most of the time given to us by God when they are for the good and the betterment of the world and for the people that of our worlds, our neighbors. Gosh, that's totally God. So the dreaming part of it, the the having permission to go after something and to build or create or dream and do something that is, outside of your current reality. There's challenges, I think, around, going where you're celebrated, not just tolerated. And again, I think for a lot of women, particularly in church spaces, in like pastoral leadership spaces, or in corporate America, in the marketplace, in regular quote unquote jobs. The women that I have coached have traditionally been the minority or the only women in the room, at the table, in the meetings, making the decisions. And there are challenges around not wanting to ruin it for every other woman that comes after you. Yep. And so that tentativeness, that hiding, the lack of showing up, the lack of boldness, the fear that is attached to that is very real, but it is also quite limiting, both to her and to all of the women that she represents, or all of the women that are going to come behind her. So, I mean, I think those are 3. I could probably give 10 more. But yeah, there's some very distinct challenges that I think that women face.
Yes, those are also true. They're all conversations I have with other women who are some of the first. I heard someone describe it recently. I think it was Joe Saxon that said, the woman who breaks the glass ceiling gets cut.
Yep.
And I was imagining that in my head, and I thought, yeah, but even if you break through a glass, there's still glass there for the other women. Yeah. So like women 2, 3, 4, and 5 are probably still maybe not getting cut as badly.
Yeah.
Not needing as many stitches in the ER, but still getting cut. It takes a while for it to be normal. And it's like one woman at the table isn't enough. Even 3 in a room of 20, there's still a lot of cuts being had. And so I know a lot of women face that. I myself have faced that at different points. And it feels lonely. There is a lot of imposter syndrome. There's a weight that people can say, don't worry your pretty little head over that. That's not your burden to bear, that all these women are looking at you. But it's just the reality. We carry that because most women leaders care and want to, like Kamala Harris said, I'm the first, but I won't be the last.
Yeah.
And so I think a lot of women who are breaking glass ceilings or among the first are always thinking of the ones coming later. And it's good, but it is hard. And it's we need coaching for that.
Well, you identified 2 more challenges there, and that is the unicorn mentality, that I am the only one. Like, I can't tell you, Lori, how many women have joined coaching groups and have like just looked around the circle in the room and gone, I didn't know that you existed. I didn't know that you also were doing that. I didn't know that this was possible, because they are often the only ones that are in the room or that are at the table. And so that can feel crazy making. When we talked about gaslighting, a few minutes ago, and just the sense of like, you just get caught in your own head around, am I imagining this? Am I thinking this? Is this actually happening? Or did I really just hear that? And so that internal conversation is some of what is so valuable in coaching, is that it creates space for those internal conversations to come out, for you to both hear validated, but also speak truth to crazy, and to reorient a narrative around what is more truthful and what is more helpful. And then you also identify the challenges of, yes, those that are coming, the glass that is impacting you, the healing and the forgiveness is a pretty core thing. It's a pretty core challenge for women, and it's a pretty core issue to actually us living and leading with wholeness. The root word for healing is actually wholeness. That as we experience healing in our stories from our past, it allows us to experience more wholeness in our present and in our future. And so I've not met one woman who has been in leadership that has not had some sort of healing or forgiveness issue to work through. And so we've made that a core part of our work.
Yeah, it's so wise. I mean, even men in leadership, there's just a lot of wounds, and there's a lot of, grief that people don't often have time to walk through. There's a lot of losses.
Yeah.
Like you just have to kind of pull yourself up and keep going. And for women who often aren't parts of strategic decisions or are coming and stepping into structures that were built by men for men, there's just, there's usually a different layer. And a lot of women are in spaces where you're not allowed to really show emotion if you're one of the first, because that can make people feel uncomfortable, especially in all male spaces where it's more of a John Wayne kind of situation. And that can be tough. It's a lot to ask to be the kind of woman that could be that way. It takes a certain strength, and it doesn't mean that she's not also getting hurt. She just doesn't feel safe probably to talk about it. But I know that you and I share something in common, which is that we're both Enneagram 8 women.
Yes.
Yeah. And so for those that understand what the Enneagram is, probably know that the 8 is the challenger, which I always feel like it seems like an insult. But I've been convicted of that this year because it's like, well, God made me this way and God made challengers. Dr. King himself was a challenger. And where would we be without him challenging a system that had ripple effects around the world, and the church included? And so I would just want to know, in your perspective, what has it been like to be an Enneagram 8 woman in the church in the US?
Gosh, I mean, I wish I could give you a big hug and be like, yes, we're together in this. I think it has been one of my greatest blessings and one of my greatest woundings, both, and most of life is that, right? It's both at the same time. So, I mean, I think that the beauty of it has been, I was able to last. I was able to hang in the spaces where I was the only, or I was a minority, for both gender and race in most of the spaces, because of that challenger spirit, because it was, I mean, really my reflexive response to life in any way, shape, or form is challenge accepted. Like, I'm just going to go for it. Like, I love a good challenge. It pushes me. It helps me be better. It allows me to go beyond my own status quo. Comfortability is like death to me. Courage is always the way that I want to move forward. And so it has been a huge gift to be able to challenge systems, or to challenge decisions, or to challenge thinking, because it's simply been intuitive for me. It's like in my blood. I can't not do it. So I think it allowed me to persevere and stay in some of those spaces for longer than maybe other types would have. But I think on the flip side, Joe Saxton, I think may have been Suzanne Stabile, who said that Christian Enneagram 8 women are the most misunderstood type on the Enneagram. And the first time I heard that, I just burst into tears. It was like a dam broken me. And I'm feelings repressed as an 8. It's not my go-to.
Yeah.
But I just burst into tears because I think that that's very much been my story. I felt very misunderstood from literally the time that I was a little girl. The messages that I received implicitly and explicitly from the time I can remember, is that my primary role, responsibility, calling in life was to be a wife and a mother. And from the earliest days of my memory, that's not what I wanted to be and do most in the world. Like, I wanted to be the first female president of the United States. There's still time.
There's still time. I'll vote for you.
It's still a possibility. But like, that's what I wanted. I had lots of dreams. I had a lot of ambitions, and wife and motherhood was included in that, but it wasn't the primary. And so on that side of it, I have felt very misunderstood, that my ambition was like harmful to those other two roles. I also was told by a previous boss that I needed to develop my soft skills more. And I was so baffled and pissed by that feedback, because I was like, I guarantee you that no other man on our executive team has ever been told that they need to develop their soft skills. And I am the softest person in the room. But because I'm a woman, that's expected, that I'm supposed to show up and to contribute and to be in a certain way. So yeah, I mean, I think it's been both a blessing and a wounding for me to be an 8, but I'm 41 right now, and I wouldn't trade it for anything. I love my 8-ness, and I love what it offers me in the world. And I'm really grateful for how I've been created, that it's not been an accident or a mistake or some sort of malfunction within me, that this is really a gift from God, and I'm embracing that.
It's uncanny how much I relate to all the things you just said. It must be such a common struggle
Yeah.
with Enneagram 8 women in the church, and such a common gift.
Yeah.
I like you. I love being an Enneagram 8.
Yeah.
And when you feel God has made you to be a certain way, you want to fully be that. That's how we all are. And there really is something in white evangelical church in America and our stereotypes around women just needing to be nice. And
Yeah.
we talked about the whole helper, helpmeet role. So there, a lot of people feel uncomfortable with a
Yeah.
woman being that
Yeah.
way. It really is kind of the quintessential male strong leader that we expect a lot of
Yeah.
even lead pastors of churches to be. And it just feels awkward, and because of our stereotypes, for a woman to be that.
Yeah.
And yet, someone recently challenged me to say, if God made you this way, and all of these words describe all Enneagram 8s, and that's what you're supposed to be, when you don't be that, you're telling God he made a mistake, or
Yep.
I'm sorry, this gift must have been for a man, not for me. You did
Yeah.
the wrong
Yeah.
thing. And
Yeah.
that's a serious problem. So
Yeah.
you can't really be that way with any of our personalities. And so,
Yeah.
yeah, I totally relate to a lot of things you're saying. Well, I know you've had a lot of strong women in your life because you did work at this
Hmm.
church that you mentioned. And I think that you were around a couple of Nancy's that a lot of people know about. And so, what are some of the women in your life that you really felt like showed you how to lead and press through some really hard and challenging times?
I never saw a woman lead in any official capacity until I was 18 years old. It was mind blowing for me when I showed up at this church and I saw Nancy Beach teaching on a weekend, leading a team of men, being responsible for a major part of the church, and had been since the formation. And then I saw Nancy Ortberg in the same way. I mean, she led an entire ministry and developed one of the really important aspects of the church. And she was a teaching pastor. And I just, as an 18 to 25-year-old, when I was at this church, watched these two women with so much awe and wonder. Like, I can't even, I mean, people often talk about you can only become what you see. I think that that's partially true. I don't think that's fully true, but it was incredibly valuable for me as a young adult to watch these two women lead and teach in spaces that I never thought were possible, and to do such a great job at it. I mean, they were just kick ass in every way. And my very first boss was Jeannie Stevens. I was 18 years old, and she was the very first person that I reported to, and she was my boss for all of those years. And so even having Jeannie as my first direct report, to have what leadership looked like, modeled to me from a female or a feminine perspective, was so valuable that it really shaped me. But I mean, honestly, my whole life has been a series of women that have showed up. Mindy Caliguire has been my spiritual director since, oh gosh, maybe 2000. My husband and I have literally never made one significant decision in our marriage without Mindy's counsel and direction, because she's so wise and we trust her so deeply. And she was in charge of spiritual formation at this church alongside of John Ortberg, and helped to craft what spiritual formation looked like for really not just the church, but for the country, and worked in partnership and collaboration with some incredible voices. And so, yeah, I really, those early days were really important for me. Nancy Beach and Nancy Ortberg and Mindy Caliguire are all still playing a very significant role in my life. They have still been very close in decision-making times, at crossroads, at places where I'm feeling stuck and not sure what to do. And so many other women as well. I think it's really very, very important for us to continue to show up in the spaces where we have been entrusted to lead, because then we get to do that for other women. And so, I mean, I've told those women, those four women 100 times, I'm impossibly grateful for them.
It's incredible. It's such a gift. And, when we look at the early church, it wasn't like that. There was this time somewhere along the way where it became a little more rare in certain church spaces to see women actively involved in these ways. And it's like you said, it's not exclusively like this, that you need to see a person like you leading, but it really does help. Whether it's a person of your own race or a person of your own gender, or even your own socioeconomic status leading,
Yes. Yep.
it's huge. It's huge on
Yep.
a psychological and a
Yep.
sociological level. And so for the women that have stayed in there, and when it's hard, It's not easy to pastor ever. And this year in particular has been challenging for so many pastors, but the layer of women pastor just has its own thing.
Yeah.
And there's a lot in the, even in our country right now in certain, circles where it's rising up again. And it's just, it kind of doesn't go away at different points. It's a hard road to travel. And I'm sure you're so indebted to these women. And, often men don't necessarily understand it completely. Some, have done a really great job. There's some really good guys, great guys out there who've done the hard work of understanding it. But it's a lot to ask when you haven't walked in someone's shoes, what it really is like to grow up as a little girl in a church and not see your gender leading or being told the things you were told. And it's very common. I hear this a lot. So what do you think, like if talking to the men that listen, what are some of the most important steps you think men in the church could take this year if they were just going to do one or two things this year to help women leaders rise in their God-given potential? What would you say to them?
Oh my gosh, I love that question. The first thought that I had is read books and listen to podcasts only by women for 12 months. Don't buy one book written by a man. Don't listen to one podcast hosted by a man, because our thinking has been so incredibly shaped by men, and I'm mine included, and I'm incredibly grateful for them. I mean, I could list off 20 of them right now that have played a significant role in my formation and in my development. However, to be able to learn and listen from somebody who is not like you takes an incredible amount of humility, and it also will just blow up your worldview. I mean, it'll shift so much of how you think about the things that you are already thinking about. You could just do a deep dive into one aspect of life, or of, socioeconomics, or of politics, or of, theology, and it would change your perspective on it if you only listened to the voices and the work of women. So I would first and foremost challenge in that. And then the second thing is, I think it would be incredibly valuable for men to take out to lunch every single woman who plays a leadership or an influential role in their world. And that could be family members. It could be people on their staffs, or like on the teams that they serve in. It could be, folks that are just kind of somehow swirling in their sphere, and ask them questions, to simply come with a curious posture to ask them about their experience as a woman in the world, period, but then in the church and when it comes to leadership. And I think that if men were really disciplined to ask the questions and provide zero feedback, zero advice, zero counsel, but to simply be curious and to listen and take notes, I think that that would make a pretty significant contribution to how their life and leadership changes after a year.
Wow, that's excellent advice. And I'm gonna pass that one on if I ever get asked. That's really good.
And the challenge is if you're a woman that is on the receiving end, right? Like if a man does that to you and asks you to come out and like talk about your experience. For women, then it means to actually be honest and truthful and go there.
Yeah.
Not give the answers that you think are appropriate or palatable or nice, but to actually speak the truth with all of the love that you can muster, right? Because the tendency is like, I have had men that have done that for me, and my tendency is to want to smooth it over and to not speak the full truth and to not actually share my experience. Because I've not wanted to hurt or offend or, challenge too much, or to limit a possible future investment or relationship there, right? So for us, on the other end, it's actually then showing up with our truthfulness.
Yeah, that's good. It seems like on both sides of that conversation, there's work to be done, right? So there's there's the side where the, male pastor, for example, male leader in a business, or whoever this male person is asking a woman to go to lunch and share, needs to create a safe space that she really can share. And there's going to be some potentially new information, potentially overwhelming information. information that's not really fixable anytime soon
Yep.
is a
Yep.
long, hard journey toward
Yep.
justice or whatever it is that she's talking about.
Yep.
But to create that safe space that even if this is hard to hear, that she can still share
Mhm.
it and without repercussions. And then she also needs to realize that she doesn't have to mother him in that moment, that the
Mhm.
truth can just be given,
Mhm.
and love, as you said. And not that it's a burden he has to bear alone, but this is the work we do together, that as their connecto, we work together, helping each other in this kingdom effort. It's not
Mhm.
something that one person can fix. These
Yep.
these are systemic issues and huge issues that affect the church. And I think that you know this very well, but in the U.S. church, especially the white evangelical church, a lot of women are leaving,
Mhm.
because the space has been not great at listening to them, at including their gifts, especially some of the high level leaders in big companies that come into the church and can't find their place.
Yep.
And so a lot of men get surprised by that because they haven't walked that road. Ever since they were young, they had a youth pastor that saw them and said, "Hey, why don't you preach next Sunday?" Or, I mean, they're
Yeah.
given these incredible opportunities so
Yeah.
young, and
Yeah.
women are often not, all the way until their 40s and 50s. And so what do you think would be something probably that men just often
Mhm.
miss, and understanding how this experience is so different for women in the church?
Yeah, I mean, I think you teased it right there, in that, like, when you're a fish and you're swimming in water, you don't realize that you're swimming in water because it's your world, right? And so I think particularly for white men in the church, they are a fish in water, and this is not true for women and people of color. Um, and so I think first the acknowledgement of that, and with as open and non-defensive of a posture as possible as they can possibly muster, that that's not necessarily their fault, that they didn't necessarily contribute or create that.
Right.
That's just true. It's
Yeah.
just true. Can we accept that as true? And then can we do something that's a little bit different? So, I mean, I'm not really answering your question right there, but I think that the acknowledgement of it starts an entirely different conversation that, depending on the relationship, um, can take 100 different ways. And that's really what so much of it comes down to, is that oftentimes these conversations move from theological or political to personal, when it's actually two humans looking at each other and going, tell me your story. Tell me what has been true for you. And there has been so much that has changed for me in my beliefs and in my thinking and in my feelings because of the relationship that has existed. When I've moved outside of the little world that I lived in and started to look at the world and people differently, it's because of relationship. So relationship changes everything.
Yeah, that's good. And at some point, even a lot of the lead male pastors of churches, when the numbers do start diving down, and women who do so much of the grunt work of the church, implementing a lot of the vision that men have, and doing the work of taking it across the finish line, a lot of times, when those women aren't there anymore, I think I hope they don't wake up too late. And so this is a call
Yeah.
for the church in general. This is a call for
Yeah.
wholeness in our society and in our
Yeah.
nation,
Yeah.
because whether you're a Christian or not, this
Yeah.
in the U.S. it's Christendom. It's on our money. It's in our inauguration ceremony. It's in our justice system. And so to let it still be so, mostly, like you said, white middle-aged men are kind of like the stereotypical lead pastor role.
Mhm.
So if you're even too young or too old for that, and you're a white male listening to this, you're also feeling even just slightly what women and people of color feel in
Yeah.
a large sense. And so I think hopefully it won't be too late for people to wake up and notice that if we don't create inclusive spaces of equity and belonging in our church at executive
Yeah.
team levels, we're limited in our decisions. Our decisions aren't broad reaching. And so this isn't just a call about women. I mean, it
Yeah.
really is so much bigger than that. And the future of
Yes.
the church is at stake,
Yeah.
and our
Mhm.
society, and how we contribute in food pantries, or the work that the church does to just help homelessness, like all those things that are there. If the church does start crumbling in this way, it really is for all of us that we're saying
Yeah.
this. So yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Like, what if in 2021, like the church just puts full stop, they don't do anything at all to help develop female leaders in the church, or activate women's gifts. What is at stake for us, even just this year, if we do nothing?
I think that the church as we know it is non-existent, or as we have known it. And quite honestly, I don't know that that's a terrible thing. God is always making things new. God is always inviting us to create new wineskins, because the old does not hold the new. And I think that there's something really beautiful that's happening in our culture, in our country right now, that sometimes, I mean, it still feels like it's very much on the fringe or on the margins, but isn't that where Jesus uh, lived anyway? Isn't
Yep.
that how it worked, right? Jesus was never in the majority. He was always with the prostitute and the outsider and the children and the misfit disciples who didn't get chosen by a rabbi. Like, Jesus was always for the other, the Samaritan, the Gentile. Like, and so part of me wants to even reframe the question of like, there's some things that need to die,
Yeah.
that we simply need to create a funeral for it and say, this did not serve so many people. This was not a reflection of the gospel. This was not what the kingdom of God was supposed to be about. And instead of trying to resuscitate something that is disease ridden, that the death is probably the gift, and there is new life to be raised from that. So I think I would pose the question just a little bit differently. And being on the outside of it at this point, I mean, obviously that's way easier for me to say, right? Like
Yeah.
I no longer receive a paycheck or benefits or anything from a church. Um, but being outside of the pastoral local church structure for the last almost 7 years now, um, it has also expanded what I view as ministry and of kingdom work and of transformation and of discipleship. And so I think that there's an opportunity here for us to do something different. It's not about doing nothing or about, change course correction necessarily. There's some new things that need to be born. And I think that women and people of color are doing it, because
Mm.
there has been so much of it can't be included in this one space. So other things are having to rise up. And so for those who have been inside of the majority, or for those who are afraid of what is dying, my encouragement would be, do not fear that actually something really beautiful is happening. And it's not to be exclusive of you. It's actually a fuller representation of the church and of the kingdom. And so what if there was a new way forward for you in that? But maybe that way forward includes more of you following, or more of you listening, or more of you taking a secondary seat, and watching what women and people of color bring.
I love it. There's so much hope there. And I'm hearing this not just from you, but from so many people right
Yep.
now. There
Yep.
really is this opportunity that we've really never had in our generation to reimagine, to
Mm-hmm.
rethink,
Yep.
to go back to really the bare basics of who Jesus
Yep.
really was. And, a lot of people talk about, and I learned this, back in church history, even 20 years ago, we were starting to talk about it, but it's certainly been more in the last year that I've heard this. But every 500 years, there's some type of reformation that needs to
Yep.
take place. And it's been 500 years since the last one. And so that there really is something changing right now. And it doesn't have to be radical, or people get killed over their baptism by immersion or weird things like that. Let's hopefully we won't go back to that. But that there is something new being birthed. And it's a question we ask ourselves: do you want to be a part of the old or a part of the new? And
Yep.
even after the Reformation, many years later, it wasn't just the Protestants that became different, but even the Catholic Church kind of did its own
Mm-hmm.
changing as a result of that,
Yep.
influence in maybe a slower direction. But but things are changing. I'm raising a generation and you're raising a generation that's really different than what it was like to grow up in the 80s with our fluorescent colors and crazy hair. But like this generation and their tech savviness and all that, like it's different. And I guess the question we have to ask ourselves is, we want to be a part of that? Do we want our kids to be a part of that? Do you want to be a part of being a part of a conversation that's more really who Jesus was, and not burning down the whole old thing, but like learning how it could be more authentic, because the world, and especially our culture in the US right now, is crying out for that. And so I love how you imagine that with us. And I just pray those kind of prayers that I'm sure you're praying, that I would be a part and not be left behind.
Yeah, I mean, I think 2020 has created such an opportunity in the midst of so much loss and so much devastation and so much uncertainty and so much angst. I mean, it was a really hard year, and it's a continuation, right? Like 2021 is already not that much different. It's really, really difficult, but there's been so many prayers that I have prayed around, God, let us not go back. You even use that phrase, like, we're not going back to anything. There is something that is needing to be created as we co-create the future with God. That has been the invitation all along, is for us to be a part of co-creating the kingdom on earth as it is in heaven. And for us to be able to integrate our whole story. I mean, at Azer & Co all the time, we talk about your whole story matters, that your work is to integrate your past and your present so that your future can be one that is aligned with God and with who you have been created to be. And there has to be something new that we do together. And it's why I love coaching, because coaching is all about the future. It's all about leveraging this present moment to create something for the future that is beautiful, that is aligned with who God is. But it has to be integrated. There cannot be let's just forget about 2020. Let's just forget about this pandemic. Let's just forget about the racial reckoning. Let's just forget about the insurrection, last month. Let's just forget that. Forgetting is not the right thing. It is the integration that brings wholeness, so that we can create something better moving forward. And yes, I have a lot of hope. I have a Black son and a Black daughter, and there are parts of raising them in this culture, in this world, that is horrifying and utterly like heartbreaking to me. Yeah. And yet it is some of the fuel that is within me of raising Black and brown children to know that something has to be different for them. And I get to be a part of ushering that in and creating some spaces so that they are fully included, embraced, and given the opportunities that my dad has had, since the very beginning of his life.
Wow. Well, that is a perfect way to end, with that hope of the future. And I'm imagining it in all its beautiful colors and all the things. Yep. And it's so exciting. I love that. That is really what our podcast is about, making a difference in the world, in all our spaces, being different, feeling different. And that's for a reason. Yep. Because when we see things from the outside, then we get a chance to really create and speak into something new and more beautiful that includes everyone. Mm-hmm. So I'd love for you to tell us where people can find you, any resources you recommend, and if there's someone listening that would like some life coaching in particular, how they could reach out to you.
The best place for all of that is ezerandco.com, EZER and co. That's our social media stuff as well. You can follow us there. We've got several free things that you can download or sign up for, that will encourage you in your journey towards wholeness, that will give you resources and tools along the way. And then in terms of coaching, we have got a bunch of coaching groups that are launching this year for women. So if that is something that you're just feeling like a little prick in your heart, or, your kind of heart's beating a little bit faster, like, I am a huge believer that coaching happens best in relationship, that transformation happens best in relationship. And so we have thrown all of our eggs in that basket, really. We are fully pouring ourselves into teams, communities of women that want to live and lead with more wholeness in their life. So that is all coming soon on the website. We're still in entrepreneurial hell with some of those logistic things getting online. But follow us at Azer & Co and all of the spaces. And we'd love for you to connect to our community.
Well, I just want to say thank you. Thank you for starting Azer & Co. And that was just a huge act of obedience on your part that I'm sure has benefited all the 500 plus women you mentioned. And I'm sure many more that are signing up. And just knowing that you are a part of something like this, I'm sure is encouraging all the people that are hearing it. It really is a huge step of faith that God asked you to take. And I'm sure it's had a lot of emotion involved and exhaustion. And it's just thank you for the many hours you've poured into bringing life to others in the way that you have. And I find so often when we have pain and suffering in our own lives, whether we know the why at the time or never do, always it's an opportunity to relate and empathize with others. And it sounds like that's a huge part of your story. I'm reading Job right now, so I'm all like camping out in pain and suffering. And yet, if somebody could have been life coached by Job after all that, that would have been the absolute best. Like, man, that guy really went through some stuff and came out of it, right?
He did.
And that's just the thing. That's the beauty of what God can do, right? And I just see that in your story. And I just want to say thank you for all that you're doing and for sharing your wisdom with us today.
Thank you, Laura. You asked beautiful questions, and I'm so grateful for your listeners being the kinds of people that want to make a difference and wherever they set their feet. The world is in need of it so desperately. So for however you need to do that in your life, press on. We need you.
Thanks, April. Talk to you later. Bye.
See ya.
Well, I'm sure you guys are all just ready to sign up for Ezra and Company's coaching at this point, because April Diaz, and along with the other coaches that she has working with her, are full of even more of what you just heard today. April just has such a heart for leaders coming together, men and women, to, instead of competing and being all weird, just as you can tell, she's very authentic. She's very straightforward. She'll tell you the truth, but in love. And she's that friend we all need, just to say what we need to hear, and but does it in such a compelling way, with hope and in a position of care and love for us. She wants us to care for our bodies, our souls, our families, our communities, and that really comes through. And I do encourage you to head over to Ezra and Company and check out what she has to offer in terms of coaching. I just really enjoy getting to know her. I met her through my spiritual director. So shout out to Savoy for introducing April and me. And I do hope that you check out more of all things April Diaz and the writing she's putting out there. She has a podcast as well, so check that out. We'll put the link to that in the show notes, and look for more of the things that she has to offer all of us, so that we can lead better together and just to take care of ourselves in the process. Next time, we are going to have Bronwyn Lea, who I also met here in California, is pastoring here, but she's actually South African, and she has written a book called Beyond Awkward Side Hugs. And yes, I encourage you to pick that up before next time. She is not only a pastor, but she's also a mom and a wife. And her book is really less about social distancing with this whole side hug concept, but it's more about living as Christian brothers and sisters in a sex-crazed world. So she really digs into all of those weird things that happen sometimes in, I guess I would say in particular, evangelical Christianity in the United States is where I've encountered it most. I'm just weird, like she says, awkward side hugs. If you experience that, you know exactly what I'm talking about. But Bronwyn has been active for 20 years in vocational ministry with people of all ages. She actually is a graduate of both law school and seminary. And she heads up Propel Sophia, which is a Christian living wisdom resource out of Propel Women, if you've heard of that. And she will come and talk to us about her book and pastoring and how we can get beyond these awkward side hugs in the church and move forward in this weird world that some of us are living in listening to this podcast. So if you don't know what I'm talking about, then consider yourself blessed. But next time we will hear from Bronwyn Lea. And in the meantime, everyone stay safe. And for those of you that are hopefully getting your COVID vaccines, which I know is very staggered, at least in the U.S. right now, and certainly not even available in every country, also consider yourselves blessed, because the rest of us are still waiting around here, like in California. In the meantime, everyone, just stay safe, and we'll talk to you next time. Bye. As we're finishing this episode, if you're thinking, I really wish I could learn more or go a little bit deeper. Well, that's what our difference maker community is for. I would love to welcome you in to join the rest of us there. Once again, it's only $5 a month to join, the price of a latte at your local coffee shop. You can join at our Changers tier. Difference Makers is a community that really means so much to me. It's very special because each time I have a guest on the show, I record something outside of what we give to just the regular podcast audience, where we go a little bit deeper. And then I post those video episodes in this community and we can discuss them. But also at the very beginning tier, which is our Changers tier of this community, you'll get exclusive voting power and help pick podcast topics that give us, more of what we want from your perspective. You'll have access to exclusive 30 plus mini-sodes that aren't out there for the general public. And you'll get every month an exclusive monthly bonus mini-sode. At our Groundbreakers level, which is $10 a month, you can join and get all of that, but also priority access to submit questions to the podcast. And you'll get an additional 2 exclusive monthly bonus mini-sodes. And at our Trailblazers tier, which is $15 a month, the price of 3 lattes a month, you can get all of that, plus also 3 exclusive monthly bonus minisodes, and a patron shout out. So I would love for you to join us at any of those tiers. It'll help you come into this community, be in the midst of all of us, other difference makers, and we'd love to hear your perspective. I certainly would. It's a place to engage more with me and the audience around what you like, what you're resonating with, and once again, go deeper with each of our guests. So please join us in this membership community. I would love to hear your perspective and love to share this extra content with you. So show up at patreon.com/a world of difference.